All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Community Focus here on Channel 6 TV. I'm Kenny Fogle, your host. Glad you could join us tonight. We're going to have an interesting show. Got Mr. Ed Swain here with us, and Ed is going to tell us about something he's done that I've been wanting to do for years, and he finally got his accomplished. I've visited probably maybe 35, 36 states in my lifetime. Ed, you got all 50.
We finished this time, yes.
All righty. Well, so
number 49 was number 50.
Number 49 was number... Well, I guess we could probably sit here and talk for 2 or 3 days about all the adventures and if we went to every state, but...
No kidding.
We're going to hit a few highlights. I mean, I know
Okay.
I saw that you said you rate the last one you went to, which was Alaska, and maybe the top 4 or 5 that you've been
I
to.
think so.
What made that so special?
Well, I think that it may be the cleanest state that we've been in.
Yeah?
And those folks have been a state since 1959, and they are very well aware of it. And there's an attitude there that you just have to appreciate.
Uh-huh.
And of course, they appreciate Texas as number 2.
Well, yeah, you got the size-wise, and I know I went to Hawaii several years ago, and they're very sensitive about people saying something about being from the states, because they are a state,
Right,
and
right.
I know they were very sensitive about that, because I said something, and one of them jumped me real quick before I even finished getting it out of my mouth.
The lower 48 is a common phrase in Alaska.
Uh-huh. Clean state. Now, I know they've got some national parks up there supposed to be phenomenal.
Well, they are. The mountains are phenomenal. We were kind of captivated by the glaciers.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some glaciers in the Rockies. We didn't happen to go through that part of the Rockies, and those glaciers kind of caught our attention.
Yeah. Now, I know they talk about it's daylight for 6 months, but it's not completely dark up there during, I don't think, the other time, but
Their time of darkness this time of year is close to ours.
yeah.
Maybe a couple more hours of light, but it's pretty close to ours. And every place you stay has got the room darkening shades just in case.
So all 50 states, is that a goal you set out for, or that just happened?
We got to a certain point and we realized that we had done about half of them. We had bought an RV and had been to the Grand Canyon and Nevada and all the 3 great parks at the south corner of Utah, and out to San Diego. And at that point, we kind of said, it wouldn't be that difficult to do all 50. And so we just started keeping count at that point.
Yeah.
We saw at one of the Camping Worlds, we saw one of those maps where you add your state when you do it, and we started keeping count when we had the RV. And so it just kind of went that way. We have probably always liked to travel. And some of the first places that we went were South Carolina, to the Charleston area, Las Vegas, New Orleans. And so when you start driving those things, the states start mounting up.
Yeah.
So we reached a point where we did a big triangle that started in Kentucky, went to San Diego, went up the California coast through Oregon to Seattle, and then we came back across a northern route, which got us into Idaho and Montana and the Dakotas, and then we worked our way down through Chicago and back home. So whole bunch of states there. And so the states in the middle were states like Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa and Oklahoma. And we kind of caught them on just a straight west trip where we got to the southeast corner of Wyoming and cut across Wyoming to Yellowstone. And that was a good trip by itself.
Yeah.
And so we kind of took care of the whole West that way. And then we had grandchildren who, when each grandchild, when they became 10 years old, we took them on a trip that they kind of got to choose. And so the first...
So none of them chose Kansas.
Nobody chose Kansas. The first one actually chose Hershey, Pennsylvania, for the obvious reason.
Yeah.
And so we got to Hershey with her, and then we convinced her to go to D.C. and to Delaware and New York City. And so that actually helped us catch some of the states that we hadn't visited. And then Rosemary had a workshop in New York City, and I was off work, so I went too. And while she was in the workshop, I fiddled around in New York City, and when she finished, we rented a vehicle and went all the way up to the Maine coast, and then into New Hampshire and Vermont. And so we pretty much took the New England states just on that one trip. And then just 2 summers ago, we went to Minnesota to visit friends, and then cut across Wisconsin. And our first entry into Michigan was in the Upper Peninsula. And so we came back home through Michigan. So that's kind of, there was some on purpose activity about it in the second half probably of the 50s.
Well, I know when you're traveling through Europe, you can really tell when you go from Germany to France to Italy to Switzerland. I mean, they're different countries. In the United States, is it a big difference when you go from state to state or from region to region? Do you see this as more of a one big country, or you see it sort of divided into separate cultures throughout the whole country?
You know, I'm puzzled over that. It's a different country in terms of climate, humidity or not.
Yeah.
That thing about the dry heat in Southern California and Arizona and New Mexico, that's true. And our heat is not a dry heat, nowhere here in the South, and so there's that. People are a whole lot the same in this country wherever you go.
Yeah.
We're all Americans, and I would say people in New York City either like to or simply have to walk a whole lot more than we do.
Yeah.
And you might expect people in Colorado to have a greater appreciation for hiking and fly fishing and things like that, and that's probably a fair thing. I think people in Maine are a whole lot like people in Kentucky. As much as you might think that's an exotic place, and it certainly is along the coast, but they're still about like we are.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you're dealing with a lot of people. I mean, obviously the South is a certain type of person. You got the Native Americans out in the western lands that you see more. You don't see as many around here. So you do encounter a whole lot different type of people.
That's true. That's true.
So it opens your eyes, I guess, and to a little bit the diversity of what we've got in the United States.
Well, that was we were reminded of that in Alaska. We stopped at 2 churches that were Russian Orthodox from 150 years ago.
We don't have too many of them around here.
And well, what had happened there is that religion had gotten overlaid over the native religions, the Athabascan culture, and they simply merged Russian Orthodoxy with their religion that they already had. So when somebody died, they were buried, and rocks were put over the top of the grave, and then blankets were put on top of that, and then a little house was built over each grave by the family, painted in their colors and so forth, and that's where the person was.
Yeah. So when you travel, I mean, obviously you have to get off the road. My wife's big complaint about me is I stay right on the interstates, and she says you got to get off the roads every now and then to see what's going on in some of the smaller towns. I'm interstate and Cracker Barrel. That's what I'm on.
Well, it's well, there are no Cracker Barrels in Alaska that I found. It took me a while to find a McDonald's and a Wendy's, and that was in Anchorage. But there are no interstates either.
Yeah.
You know, there's some 4-lane, but really, you get to about all the places you can get in Alaska on 5 roads: the Parks Highway, the Richardson Highway, the Glen Highway, and a couple others.
Yeah.
Sterling. And so, no interstates. But we have found getting off of the interstate to be safer and more relaxing.
Oh, yeah?
You know, we did a trip to to a place near Branson in Missouri. And instead of going up to St. Louis on an interstate and across in a southwesterly direction to Branson on another interstate, we went straight across. Well, that kind of a trip has its advantages and disadvantages. Lots of little speed zones, lots of scenery that you're never going to see anywhere else. And no McDonald's, Hardee's, or Wendy's, because it's just all little towns. And you can pick a route through Kentucky or a route through Missouri, or I'm sure just about any other state that you might sometimes think you're in a third world country. But close to the interstate, it's not like that. So we've kind of gotten to where we do both. We do the interstate to cover distance, and then we try to get off and
I find people pretty welcoming, in different states. I mean, they see that Kentucky license tag. Does it give them a little pause for a second? Because sometimes, we've got a little stereotype about ourselves as well in some places.
Just about everywhere we go, people tell us they're coming to the Derby.
Oh, yeah.
You say Kentucky, they think Derby or bourbon.
Yeah.
Which there were some complimentary thoughts about bourbon. In Anchorage, I had to correct somebody about the difference in actual bourbon and Tennessee whiskey.
Oh, yeah?
I asked for a Maker's, and they offered me a Jack. And I said, well, we don't drink Tennessee whiskey. And so, a lot of places, they don't make a difference between that Tennessee whiskey and real whiskey.
Okay. Well, now traveling for one thing, now you've got all 50 states now. I guess the big test now is what you like. Is what do you plan to do now? Is there any particular places you want to revisit? Obviously, you didn't get all the parts of every state.
Oh, no.
So there's a whole lot left of this big country to see.
There are places I'd go back to any chance I got. And of course, one's the coast of Maine. Another is Santa Fe and Taos, New Mexico. The coast of California, north of San Francisco. It seemed like that we were there and could have stayed there longer.
Yeah.
And then Seattle and Portland, that's very recent for us, and we really appreciated those areas. So, and there's that. Yeah. There's one place we always go back to, and that's Isle of Palms in South Carolina. Yeah. We go there every year, at least once. And so we'll be going there pretty much. But a place that we feel like that we need to get back to and spend more time in is northeastern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's not at all crowded. You're in between two beautiful lakes, and so we'd kind of like to get back there.
I've heard a lot of good. I've never been that part of Michigan, so I've always wanted to go there. Now, historical, I'm sure you've seen a lot of. I know sometimes you get a little disappointed. Some people say that I've stopped in places that wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be, but you still get to see a lot of history when you travel.
You can never let somebody tell you that a place is a tourist trap. And I have two examples. One is Venice, which we were warned not to go to Venice, and we went, and we're sorry we didn't stay longer.
Yeah.
The other one was Gettysburg. People talk about Gettysburg being nothing but trinket shops and a tourist trap, but we went out there to the Gettysburg battlefield area, and they had a self-guided tour, and we did that thing, and I never felt more patriotic than visiting the various locations of the Battle of Gettysburg and of the Gettysburg Address. So you just you don't want to write anything off.
Yeah. So if your advice to people out there, if you're going to travel, is pick out a map and do what?
Well, what we did with Alaska is we read all the advertising brochures from the travel companies, and we read the guidebooks and so forth, and we kind of made a list of the things we felt like we needed to see, and the things we felt like we didn't, and then planned out a route.
Yeah.
And basically, we flew into Anchorage and did 2 days going down on the Kenai Peninsula. It's just beautiful country, mountains, glaciers, the ocean right there, and so we had a lot of fun doing that. Those little towns with the Russian heritage and the native heritage were all very very interesting.
Can you see Russia from Alaska?
We couldn't, but we saw the Russian Orthodox churches. Yeah. And so then we went out on the third day, went out toward Denali, which I can't hardly imagine going to Alaska without going to see Denali. So we went out in that direction, and we saw two interesting things that we didn't anticipate at all. One of the first exits going out of Anchorage is to Eklutna, and we stopped at a little village there in the church and churchyard where it had the the onion-domed steeples on the church, and then the little houses over the graves that I mentioned to you. They had an American Legion cemetery, and it was, I thought, really interesting. Native Americans who had served and died in our wars. So there was that, and then we were going along and almost to Denali. In fact, we'd pulled off and I'd taken one picture of the big one from a good distance away, and we turned onto a road called Petersville Road and went past a cabin called the Donaldson 59ers cabin. And it's just a little roadside park, and we pulled up and looked at it. In 1959, 21 families from Detroit homesteaded in Alaska. And that was one of the cabins that was left from then. They weren't all very successful, but some of them.
There's a movie, I think, coming out soon about that. So, well, I guess my thing is about traveling, and I'm the world's worst about it because I don't take my own advice. But if you have the time, take time because I know I traveled from San Francisco to Miami one time in 3 days. I mean, I saw the United States in a whisk, so that was not a good thing.
This trip, we had 9 days, 2 days in the air and 7 days on the ground. And there's nothing that we did that we wouldn't do again. But we would take probably 2 or 3 more days. We would have spent probably another day down on the Kenai, and then another day in the Fairbanks neighborhood. So there are things that you realize that you are passing up that would have been worth doing if you had had more time, but we've had that all over the United States.
You an ocean person or a mountain person?
It's
because that seems to be the debate with people when they want to go somewhere. Do they want to go to the mountains, or go to the ocean, or go to the Yellowstone?
I kind of like both, but for relaxing, of course, it's the ocean.
Yeah.
But the mountains are very exciting. I'm not a hiker or a mountain climber or anything like that, so it's sightseeing for me. There's not a physical challenge or any of that. So probably the ocean gets a little edge.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate you stopping by during your stay here in Kentucky for a few days while you're home for a little bit, so preparing for your next trip.
Well, it's nice to be home.
Yeah, it's always nice, and that's a beautiful thing. It is always nice to come home. I don't care where you go, but it's always an adventure to go see what the rest of the world's doing and how they think, how they look, how they talk. I mean, it's just, and people can tell, they can tell by my accent. I mean, yours is nothing like, but for me, they know exactly where I'm from almost when I open my mouth, so I got to be careful.
Well, I thought when I was a kid that we'd all finally get that middle American accent from Kansas or Nebraska that Dan Rather and those guys had, or the guys before Dan Rather, really. But it hasn't happened. I think people notice our twang less than they used to.
Maybe. I know I'd been gone for a year before. First time I'd heard a Southern accent when I came back from when I was in the military. I came back through Memphis, Tennessee, and and I can still remember it to this day. I said I'd never paid attention to an accent until I came home. So,
well. That's fair.
Yeah. Ed Swain here with us. He's been traveling all 50 states in the United States and other parts in the world as well. So again, that's something that it's a quest a lot of people look for, and it's something, like I said, it's wonderful that you can do that. And I know you're still a young man. You got a lot more traveling to do.
we plan to travel more.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Ed Swain here with us. Appreciate you being with us, and stick around. A lot more to come here on Channel 6 TV. We'll be right back.